sure I wouldn't get it wrong, and I got it wrong. All right. As Jenny said, in case you missed the introduction, this is on adaptive skateboarding, and I'm Lily James. As you could probably guess, I'm a bit peculiar. It's the autism. My impairments caused by autism are mostly language-based, but mostly I'd consider being on a spectrum pretty beneficial. I'm different, yes, but that's okay. I'm also a stand-up comedian, so if you laugh at all during this, that's technically professional points. Skateboarding was one of the reasons I've been able to understand this about myself. A lot of skateboarding is learning to balance your body and mind. Most importantly, though, I've discovered over the last year that the history of skateboarding is intertwined with disability. Skateboarding is an action sport, but it's also a culture, an art form, and a lifestyle that's not just including the excluded, but also celebrates what makes a person excluded to begin with. Throughout the presentation, you'll see QR codes on some slides. Each one leads you somewhere different with information I couldn't fit in this presentation. Feel free to scan them with your cell phone as I go along, or ignore them if you please. There are 4 stances in skateboarding. Each one's determined by your footedness, which is whichever foot steers the nose of the board. I'm a goofy skater myself, so my natural stance is my left foot pushing from the back, while my right foot steers on the nose. Switch for me would therefore be right foot pushing and left foot forward, which is something I don't do very often because it's a slight change that makes it incredibly difficult to steer. It's all subjective and personal based. One person's switch on paper is another person's fakie, but the exact form the stance takes will be different. Even though your footedness is the same in those situations, because your muscles developed over your life to be a certain footedness, it'll be slightly different between those two people. When it comes to disabled skaters, though, this is emphasized by their gait deviations, which become part of their skate stance and form. I have a video here to showcase some of that. Adaptive skateboarding is figuring out what works for you. Most above-knee prosthetic users will remove prosthesis while they're skating and use crutches or adopt a sitting stance. Below-knee users, complications come down more to building confidence and figuring out how to move their artificial foot accurately with their hips. Sight-impaired skaters will ride with a cane, etc. There's an almost endless amount of ways that you can adapt your skating to skateboard. Componentry is very broad, from runner blades to satch feet. It depends on the needs of the skaters and what they feel comfortable with breaking or using. Above knee amputations generally don't wear the device because the knee components are far more expensive than foot components and almost certainly going to break even if you have high-end X3 or something even greater. Sitting down on the board is sometimes used in lieu of wheelchairs in everyday life, as the reported experience is more independence and freedom for the skater to navigate the world and at higher speeds. These boarders also report feeling less self-conscious about riding a skateboard than a wheelchair, but that's also a very personal experience. All of these variations are allowed in professional competition, as the rules for skateboarding are intentionally broad for the sake of encouraging growth and change in the industry. Tony Hawk's first professional team, a skateboarder you probably have heard of, the Bones Brigade, has featured numerous skaters with disabilities like Rodney Mullen, John Comer, and Steve Caballero, who've helped grow the sport into a culture, lifestyle, and art form centered on individual expression. That is one of the blind skaters I briefly mentioned earlier, using his cane to guide himself. Rodney Mullen is considered the godfather of modern skateboarding because the current popular style of skating, called street, is built from the list of tricks he developed as a freestylist. He's also a mentally and physically disabled skateboarder. Steve Caballero, a former Bones Brigade teammate with scoliosis, claimed Rodney is the good kind of insane, and is believed by many that Rodney's disabilities, physical and mental, are what enabled him to develop most of street skateboarding's tricks today. To skateboarders, having crutches is not a crutch. It's an opportunity for doing backflips that a more able-bodied skater literally cannot do. Rodney used his disabilities to figure out the impossible flip, for instance, named so because before him it was considered literally impossible to flip a skateboard laterally due to the unique challenges that rotation presents. Several pros have had limb differences, deafness, blindness, while OCD and Asperger's and personality disorders are all practically commonplace. These are all disabilities that skateboarding has embraced as the mainstream. Adaptive skateboarding is a chance to celebrate all kinds of gait deviations with a creative flair that makes something special only a disabled skater can do. John Comer, the first professional skateboarder with a prosthetic limb, has a unique trick called the kick your front foot off flip, where he lands on the residual liner after flipping the board with his artificial foot while intentionally discarding the entire socket with it. Even within limb differences, this is still unique because it requires the difference he has to be specific in that there's no bulbous end, which would lead to doors required for donning and doffing. The skateboard, since it's also used as a mobility aid, particularly in Brazil and South America, can be considered easier to transport and maneuver than a wheelchair, and is used by those skaters throughout their everyday, in their home, in the park, navigating to the bus, off the bus. It's their life. Whatever the exact needs of a skater are, it's still skateboarding and still competitively legal. When I first started this project, I had no idea how accepted into the mainstream adaptive skateboarders already are. There's many out there, and they've always just been part of skateboarding. And the physical differences that occur in adaptive skaters means that the individualism in their skate style is as absolute as many needs to come up with their own stance and skate gait. The tricks an adaptive skater will do is often done in a manner only they can do. For decades, successful and recognized skaters have included people with disabilities among their ranks in what's considered ordinary mainstream skateboarding. Physical and mental disabilities find a strong sense of respect with skaters because the lifestyle encourages respect for struggle, and it's something that painfully teaches one to understand how falling down is the first part of picking yourself back up. It's a sport that knows what it's like to not be welcome. Most parks have their adaptive skaters. It's more common than culture consciously realizes because they're not seen as a burden. It's witnessed as something unique and special that skaters welcome instead. Oscar Loretto Jr. is a professional skateboarder that I interviewed during the course of this project, and he credits skateboarding with finding confidence, direction, his personal professional career, which beyond skateboarding is as a film and video editor, and he learned how to fall through skateboarding. Before discovering skateboarding, he wasn't really aware he was disabled until middle school, and after discovering skateboarding, he realized there's a place for him to have friends and a social life, and it taught him confidence. And now it's something that he will quit before he quits walking. Something he will keep doing after he quits walking. Oh, he's sponsored by College Park OMP, as mentioned in the previous presentation a little bit, and they basically helped pay for his devices and taught him how to set up and align his own devices as well, as his foot commonly gets knocked out of place every few months, and he now just aligns that himself instead of going back into the lab in clinic. This is his particular foot that he uses. It's the Venture foot by College Park, and commonly reported by skaters is that more mainstream prosthetics like Ottobock, Oser, and Freedom break too quickly. So even though that the Venture foot is a little bit bulky and heavy and older, it's durable and dexterous with triaxial technology and two-stage response. It also gives certain amount of dexterity in the feet. The front bumper provides comfort, which limits the compression in the foot, and it allows a little bit of motion and feel that the skaters tend to like, and it breaks less, which is a huge issue. Future involvement from skaters could lead to more practical consideration into the designs of action-oriented components. Here's a blow-up of the Venture foot and how it comes apart. Superficially, it kind of myself reminds me of a skateboard truck in that they both rely on tightening bushings to adjust how much motion is going on. And in conclusion, I feel that learning about skateboarding, and I don't know, maybe if you own a clinic sponsoring an adaptive skater, the board is a good thing to learn about. It's an extension of your body or device if you skate with a prosthetic, and using it at first is awkward and difficult to predict. However, as you develop, your body starts to understand what the skateboard should be doing and where it should be going, kind of like a prosthetic. Getting the board from points A to B becomes less about thinking how to move and more like telling your board where to go with your legs. Skateboards are structurally similar as well to laminated prosthesis, and you get a very uh, intimate feel for how changing any part of it might change something in a might change the end user experience of a prosthetic device. And to conclude, here's the adaptive skateboarding website I developed. There's a gallery of adaptive skaters' Instagrams on there, and the full skate video that I made of various adaptive skaters. Please visit. And I'd like to give a special thanks to these lovely people, especially Vanessa Yap and all of GBC P&O really at this point. You've all helped me so much, and Skill, fantastic. Take it back to you, Jenny. Bob?
Great job, Lily. I'm glad your goofiness has been embraced by the skateboarding community. Again, I'd like to open up the floor for questions. I can start though. Lily, you mentioned that breaking of componentry is a large problem for adaptive skateboarders. In your research, did you come across any adaptations to the board or to the park or to the skate park that are possible to reduce that, as opposed to adaptations to the person or their prosthesis?
That's a good part in your question about the park, because I haven't seen anything specifically about park adaptations, although in 2018, Toronto passed a, what's the word here, a strategy for development of skateboarding parks and skateboarding within the city. And making the parks accessible was explicitly outlined in the action plan, but what exactly that entailed was not very clear. As for the boards themselves, and this is true in professional competition, as far as I understand, this is true for the Olympics coming up, that as long as the board has 2 trucks, 4 wheels, and there's a literal piece of board, it's legal. So you can actually add handles to it and make it a scooter, quote unquote, and it's still considered skateboarding and it's still considered professionally legal. So there, that being said, there is some adaptations that have been done to boards. A particularly paralyzed individual, he basically just crams his legs underneath him onto the board and has wet blocks of wood screwed into the board that help lodge his feet into place. And then he uses his arms with drywall paddle, like drywall scrapers, and uses those to push himself off the ground instead of legs. Another common thing with above knee prosthetics is to use the scooter thing, but also some will have a kind of like a gondola staff that they have that's been adapted for use on pavement with a little bit of flare on the end, and they'll use a pole to push themselves instead of their legs, which will stay on the board as stationary as possible while using that above knee prosthetic. Those will usually be more street boarders than trick boarders, so for cruising.
Awesome, thanks for that, Lily. We have a question in the chat box from Heather. She says, awesome presentation, Lily. You mentioned the venture foot for skateboarding, but is there a pediatric version or foot you found that is suggested for kids getting into the sport?
That is also a good question. I think a lot of the adaptations I mentioned earlier would take place for a lot of kids, where for children, it'll be less about what foot componentry they had, and more about making sure that they're confident with whatever they have. So if you have to put handles on the board, go for it. Kids for the most part, since they're just going to be learning to push around and stuff, having dexterous or durable components will be less of an issue. That's an issue for older skateboarders who are moved on to learning how to ollie and jump off of stuff. The extra forces going through that foot when you're kick flipping is different than when you're just pushing. But that being said, it really depends on the kid. Like Oscar, when he was younger, he was just skating adult feet for a lot sooner than most kids his age would be skating because he just kept breaking all the pediatric feet. So I guess that'd be the best answer, is that no, they just tend to move up to adult feet sooner. There's also one particular skater actually in France whose name Clement something. There's a video of him where he starts off by taking apart his foot by literally, because he broke it, he literally cuts away the rubber and the broken section and then skates with the broken foot. So like the adaptability can go even beyond what feet you have, but to where you've broken it. You just change it up a little bit and still skate on it. I think that's it for the questions then.
I think so.
Maddie raised a hand.
Oh, a last sort of more vague question, I guess. I sort of tried to get into skateboarding last summer. Was pretty difficult. As like maybe somebody that was trying to get into skateboarding, would you maybe recommend like a longboard, or is that just like too far off just because it's a little bit easier?
No, that's very excellent. That street boarding's cruiser paddle pole thing, usually combined with a longboard. Longboards are more stable, and yeah, it's still skateboarding. There's a little bit of contention in the culture about that, but yeah, it's still skateboarding. The only real difference is a longboard doesn't have some of the mechanical components to it that are specifically designed to encourage trick skating, but it's a more stable and easier to use board for sure.
Cool, thanks.
And don't feel bad. Getting into skateboarding is hard. There's professional like NFL athletes who they skateboard to show off the fact that they can skateboard. Meanwhile, they're a professional linebacker. Yeah, it's difficult. All right, I guess it's Jenny now. Back to Jenna.
Thanks, Lily. That was a great presentation. I can't say that I've tried skateboarding.